don't know, I hate to say it, but I was struck by how beautiful it was. So I guess at that point, I probably was a little nervous because here I'm just showing up. I'm this black guy, like I'm here, and this guy starts approaching me, and I introduce myself. I'm Justin. I'm researching my family's history, and I believe they're connected to Amped Hill. And he was very gracious, and he told me that his brother-in-law owns it, and they recently reacquired the property. They're descendants of the original owners of Amped Hill, and that this is when they might be back. Feel free to look around. And I remember when he kind of walked off, I just started looking around the house and looking at some of the outbuildings. And I do remember, like, I broke down in tears, and I started imagining where my family worked, where they may have been. I started to think about my grandfather, who was very young when his mother died, and started to think about perhaps she died in this building here. It was an emotional time to be there.
I was hit now by the ice that stuck on the cars, on the roof of the cars.
I came out there a second time.
They don't clean before they proceed, before they drive.
Left a note.
And this is the third time today.
The Harrison families that own it today. And then I feel like shortly after that, Randy reached out to me, and we set up a time for me to come back and meet Randy and his wife Paula. And they're very gracious, and we sat down, and I think they had a glass of water, and we talked. And they gave me a tour of the house, and told me they wanted to stay connected. And that was pretty much the extent of that first meeting. When I was meeting Randy for the first time, I do remember searching his face, right? Because there's so many stories of enslaved Black Virginians being, related biologically. I mean, you're related regardless of whether you're descendant or whatever, but you're related through, the institution of slavery, but the stories of being related by blood. At that time, I recognized that could be a possibility. And so I remember trying to see in his face any resemblances to relatives of mine. I do remember that. When I first met Randy, I was asking him questions about records and things papers they may have. I know he pulled up his family tree, I guess, on Ancestry, and he was trying to see, I guess, what he could pull from those online records. But I think he's also going through a period in his life where he's wanting to know more about his family history. And they're also interested in the history of the enslaved community here as well, which was good to hear. Our initial meeting could have gone so many different ways, right? I could have met someone who was in complete denial of this history, or somebody who was defensive. I could have met someone who was kind of an apologist for his family's actions, or even tried to present this narrative of benevolence. There could have been many different routes this conversation could have taken. But one thing I appreciated was the fact that Randy was very matter of fact, and he understood the fact that this was very exploitative economic system. And I appreciated that, because that's the truth. What do you do next once you know this history? Like, how do I interact with Randy and Paula's children who are my age? Would it be appropriate for us to have a friendship? Would that be different?
My wife thinks I'm crazy, but when my oldest daughter was 3, I was like, we need to talk about slavery. She was like, no, don't talk about slavery. I'm like, no, you have to. I think but it has to be certainly age appropriate. I mean, calculus is hard, physics is hard, but in preschool they're doing physics. right? And we're not calling it physics, right? They're doing basic math. No one would say, well, calculus is hard, so we're not going to teach math until they're in high school. You build a foundation. And I think you have to do the same thing when you're dealing with these hard subjects in the humanities, particularly with American slavery. You build a foundation.
What do you make of what we're doing right here? At Montpelier, the plantation home of James Madison, one of the founding fathers and a key founding father, when it came to the founding principles that we so revere in the Constitution. Montpelier is trying to turn around the way we tell our history.
They are, and they're doing a great job. This is where James Madison, essentially the father of the Constitution, drafts the Bill of Rights, right? Like, it's here. This is the founding document of our nation. And what Montpelier, through their exhibitry and through their interpretation of this historic site, is saying that you cannot understand what happened in that second floor library where James Madison is offering this vision of a new democratic society unless you understand what was also happening in the cellars where the enslaved folk were working, unless you understand what was happening in that South Yard where they were working and living, and unless you understand what was happening in the fields, because that made possible the time and space and luxury for Madison to help craft and create what was going on in that library.
You know, as I was driving through this beautiful countryside today to reach Montpelier, I saw a sign that said James Madison's home just up the road a couple miles, and farther down the road a sign for the Wilderness, which is the bloody battle of the Wilderness. It was the Civil War that was to come decades after James Madison's lifetime, and it was an eerie foreshortening of the unresolved history of enslavement.
You know, we think about it's often said that the slavery was America's original sin. I actually say, no, slavery is America's origin. That's the beginning. That's the foundation. There was no talk of sort of a civil war in, the revolutionary period because everyone understood that we are fully dependent upon slavery, right? But it very much, as the nation evolves, as the economy evolves, then there is this greater sense of inevitability, right? Of a conflict that will have to be resolved, and it ain't no compromise that's going to save it.
What do you make of what happened in Charlottesville in August? The gathering of the alt-right just 20 miles from Montpelier.
Yeah, I think it's a reflection, it's an amplification of attitudes that have always existed, right? I mean, it's white supremacy. And we would like to think, at least some of us would like to think, that it has lessened over the years. It's still there. It's always been there. Most people will admit it's always been there. But that, to a certain extent, these public outpourings of support for white supremacy and embrace of white supremacy were no longer publicly acceptable. And I think Charlottesville was a wake-up call for those of us, myself included, who had come to believe, or at least like to believe, that we had moved far enough away or into the future that was no longer the case. That people at least may still harbor those views, but certainly didn't feel comfortable and empowered to sort of share them in this sort of public way that has real-world consequences, Heather Heyer. Right? I mean, people lose their lives as a result of this belief in white supremacy. And the wake-up call is, like, no. Like, it's not only do people still believe it, but there are people in the highest echelons of our nation that think that it's okay, that they themselves are embracing a very visceral version of it. And that all comes to a head right down the road in Charlottesville.
Jeffries is a professor of history at Ohio State University. This is With Good Reason. We'll be right back.
Please join me as we explore the history and influence of gospel music on Rock and Soul.
You really can't divorce African American musical culture from the gospel tradition.
Listen to The Gospel Roots of Rock and Soul from NPR.